online or physically. Dear Mr. Gasper, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really happy to welcome you to this live and online event. On behalf of CSD, we all know that this is a very important topic concerning the energy and climate security. Now, we started a tradition with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung from 2009, and each year we're having this conference on energy and climate security so that we focus on the main priorities based on the latest models and research and views globally and on a European scale. We were able to give a good example for public-private partnership in this respect. We always invite all interested parties. All the political parties in the future parliament have already been invited. And we haven't got a government yet, but I'm sure that in the same way that we did in 2009, we will be able to have a conference with the future Energy Commission. I'm sure some of the members are already here today, and I'll be relying on their active participation. The topics for discussion today are global, but they've got their effect on Bulgaria. My colleagues, Martin and Dr. Primova, who will be the moderator of the discussion, will tell you in details what we are doing. Now, the CSD, as of this year, has a separate energy and climate program. You will listen to its director, Martin Vladimirov, later on, because it's a very important issue. Now, to outline a couple of important issues concerning the basic topic that we've been working on for 20 years, and I'm sure that you will be interested. We'll have participants from France and Germany coming in online. This is management and fighting corruption. Now, in our energy sector, this has been a problem. It's being discussed during the government setting up process, and during our previous meeting, 2009, we were really hopeful on improving this management. And I hope that some of the lessons that we've learned will help us along the way. I'll talk about 4 of them. I'm sure my colleagues will mention more. First of all, the framework and the priorities. After all, Bulgaria is part of the EU, and for the next 7 or 10 years, 5% of the GDP will be received from the program for reconstruction and development received from the EU, which means that Bulgaria has to set up its priorities very well within this broad European discussion. One of the serious mistakes of the past, and I hope we're not going to repeat it, is to believe that we can use those resources for geopolitical projects together with Russia, which leads to losses, corruption, fraud, and we've had a lot of fraud that we discovered concerning the Belene power station, Tsakov Kamak, the state-managed privatization of ČEZ, the Varna power plant. So all those issues have to be addressed. Let's say that it's a good idea when we talk about reconstruction and development that we shouldn't repeat the mistake of mega projects, because we understood that the Bulgarian administration doesn't have the capacity to manage projects worth billions. Usually those are projects that lead to a lot of resources spent on a couple of businesses, circles of companies, and we all know them, whether gas or batteries or something else. When attention is not focused on the energy-poor Bulgarian consumer, if it's not compliant with the European goals, priority technologies for developing Bulgaria, energy efficiency, and so on, change is not going to happen. Positive change is not going to happen. Next, we have to have a vision, a specific goal. Bulgaria is one of the few countries without a specific date for ending coal-based economy. And this has economic and political consequences. Investors cannot decide what to do. The state-run energy cannot have its mathematics right, and the Bulgarian climate and energy policy is rather confused. It has many things for many people, and it's not really clear. And research and development cannot be done properly in this way. And to wrap up, I must say that the challenges are enormous. A couple of weeks ago, for instance, just before the parliamentary and presidential elections, CSD surveyed the skepticism concerning the Green Pact and the green transition. This is a problem which is very serious. It's related to the problem of management and climate. The whole of Eastern Europe is rather skeptical, but Bulgaria is even worse. It's almost the same with COVID and the vaccines. So you can see what efforts we have to make to overcome that skepticism. I'm sure that the PPP that we're having, and together with our European partners, will be able to do this transition, and I'm giving the floor to our partner, Mr. Thorsten Garson from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. You have the floor, sir.
Ruslan, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of Konrad Adenauer Foundation to today's conference. And I would like to, by starting our partner, the Center for the Study of Democracy, for their excellent cooperation, which we have enjoyed for many years. And I thank you, Ruslan, for your introductory remarks. It's always a pleasure to cooperate with you and to meet you. Today we are going to discuss the energy and climate security risk nexus in Europe. Energy security comprises a lot of aspects: security of gas and electricity supply, access to energy, risk preparedness and cross-border cooperation in the times of pandemics, diversification of gas supply sources and routes, emergency stocks of oil, cybersecurity and protection of critical infrastructure, offshore oil and gas security, safety, and oil and gas licensing. Climate security refers to the security risks induced, directly or indirectly, by changes in climate patterns. They are manifold. Average global temperatures are increasing, sea levels are rising, and severe weather patterns are accelerating, to give some examples. There are more. The nexus between both topics is evident. Energy security is a condition for a well-functioning economy. But the pressures caused by climate change will place additional burdens on economics, societies, and governance institutions. Resource competition will become sharper. Energy security should in fact mean sustainable energy security. So both energy security and climate security risks must be addressed, and that is exactly what the European Union is determined to do. Climate security can only be reached by a climate-neutral economy, decarbonization, by an early coal phase-out, by building a sustainable energy infrastructure with a focus on renewable energy. And this is exactly what the Green Deal aims at. It wants to set the conditions for sustainable economic growth, for sustainable jobs, for prosperity. It will cost money. The European Green Deal investment plan aims to obtain 1 trillion euros of investments by dedicating a greater share than ever of the EU budget to climate and environmental action, by providing the necessary tools in order for investors to put sustainable finance at the heart of the financial system, and by assisting authorities and project promoters in planning, designing, and executing sustainable projects. It is a great chance for the European Union. And I know the skepticism in this country, but I'm convinced it is also a great chance for Bulgaria. I'm very pleased that so many well-renowned and high-ranking personalities have joined us today, and I wish to express my profound thanks to them for sharing their expertise with us. And so I wish this conference every success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Благодаря. Сега
And in order not to waste time, I'm giving the floor to our moderator, Dr. Radustina Primova, Chief Expert. You have the floor, Radust.
Good morning, everyone. To all the participants here in person and our participants online.
Our audience, both of you that are joining us live and the ones that are joining us online, a very warm welcome to our international hybrid conference, the Energy and Climate Security Risk Nexus in Europe, that is taking place live here in Sofia, but also we have participants that are joining us online today. My name is Radustina Primova, and I have the pleasure and also the privilege of navigating us through this complex topic today. As you can see, our panel is fully packed, so please stay with us until the very end. I promise you won't regret it. With these words, I would like to set currently the topic for today's meeting. The first panel will focus on European perspectives on energy and climate security. The latest IPCC report from August 2021 this year, that was called a Code Red for Humanity, already underlined the urgency for global climate action. And also that it estimated that it's most likely that in the next 20 years we might reach the 1.5 degree target. There will be already irreversible consequences like rising sea level that we cannot prevent. But at the same time, it called us for quite urgent actions that if we don't take rapid, immediate, and also global scale actions, which means massive reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions, also the 1.5 and below 2 degrees Celsius might be beyond our reach. During the climate summit in Glasgow that took place, the first 2 weeks of November, already for the first time, a deal was reached that targeted for the first time fossil fuels as one of the global drivers for rising emissions. After the climate summit in Glasgow, now countries have to do their homework. For the European Union, also the homework also means implementing the European Green Deal also in different member state countries, and also implementing the new Fit for 55 package, which already sets new European increased targets of reducing emissions with 55 degrees by 2030, which means that member states need to review already next year and increase their climate ambition already for 2030. However, as already Ruslan mentioned, with growing climate skepticism, some member states are resisting to increase their emission for 2030. At the same time, we see new national dynamics taking place in different countries, new governments. As we already see, there is a new government coalition in Germany, in Sweden, and also last year there was also a new government in Austria that are currently taking key energy decisions that will also impact our energy landscape for the next 20 years. And we also have invited speakers that will also talk about this later. Our first panel will focus in particular on the European perspectives on the challenges, and in the second panel we have also with us Bulgarian politicians that will currently focus, well, in Bulgaria we still have negotiations, the negotiations ongoing on how Bulgaria can achieve inclusive green recovery. Without further ado, I would like to present our first speaker, Martin Vladimirov, who is the director of our Energy and Climate Program at the Center for the Study of Democracy. He is going to give us a snapshot of the key energy and climate security challenges also for Europe and for Bulgaria, how they interrelate each other. He's also going to outline some of the key pathways and also solutions how to overcome the current energy crisis, as the current energy crisis is also testing the European credibility to deliver the European Green Deal. And finally, we'll outline what are the next actions that Bulgarian should take. So the floor is yours, Martin.
Thank you very much, Radustina, and I'd like to thank everybody present here, online also.
Just to keep the whole panel English-speaking one. There will be a Bulgarian panel after that, focusing exclusively on Bulgaria. In my short presentation, I just want to frame the discussion a little bit, not focus only on Europe, but also kind of point to the Bulgarian place within the EU decarbonization framework. We are in a very strange year in 2021, and this is not only because of COVID, but because of the gas and electricity crisis. That has become a stark reminder that the energy policy trilemma of achieving affordability, energy security, and environmental sustainability is far from solved. It's very difficult to combine these three things together. The crisis has also revealed how the over-reliance on fossil fuels, as well as the concentration of mineral resources in states such as Russia and China, could significantly increase climate and energy security risks and could undermine the viability of the energy transition. Unfortunately, the crisis has also bolstered voices for the revision or even the abolition of the European Green Deal. This will be very wrong. The European Green Deal is not the cause, but the solution to the energy crisis. On the eve of this conference, CSD developed a short policy document outlining the main elements of a new energy and climate security strategy for Bulgaria, which is based on in-depth modeling assessment of different scenarios. The main policy takeaways that I'll present come from analyzing the gaps in the current energy and climate policy framework. And we'll try to see how a future decarbonization scenario can evolve. Unfortunately, and I want to switch the slide. Unfortunately, the current long-term energy and climate policy is not in line with the EU decarbonization objectives until 2050. Hence, there is an urgent need for the formulation of a new such strategy, and this is a great moment to start the debate as the coalition talks are ongoing in Bulgaria. Our colleagues from Germany and France would point out the priorities for their countries and for Europe in general, but Bulgaria should not steer too far away from the European consensus that multiple governments have signed off during the years. So what should be the main elements of this new strategy that will bring us closer to the EU consensus? First and foremost, the least costly pathway to a low carbon and energy secure economy is to transform the electricity mix and to boost electrification in all sectors of the economy. This means an earlier lignite phase out before 2030. This is very important to point out because our current strategy envisions coal phase out at least from 2038 onwards. This strategy of lignite phase out before 2030 would boost the profitability of actually additional thermal power plants that will remain in the system. So it's also an economic choice, not just a low carbon transition choice. In addition, Bulgaria must complete its gas diversification and security supply projects because the integration of the Southeast European gas markets is not complete yet. We must actually avoid a natural gas lock-in via the concentration of significant EU and national financial resources in the building of new gas transmission infrastructure and a wholly new 1 gigawatt gas-fired power plant that is currently envisioned in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. Actually, the most sustainable way to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels and to boost the decarbonization potential of the country is to unlock our renewable energy capacity. The latter would require the enabling of private investment, not public money. This is very important. Through targeted reforms that streamline the regulatory framework, reduce the administrative burden, and shift the focus to a citizen-led decentralization of power generation. Moreover, higher renewable energy integration in the system leads to overall lower prices, prices that are bound to increase further in the next decade. As overall market prices remain high, the cost of support mechanisms themselves from the state, which could be in the form of tenders or other instruments, would be minimal. Actually, there will be not much state support. This calls actually for the reallocation of resources such as the revenues from the selling of ETS quotas to the support of such new renewable energy projects. This is an instrument that has not been used yet. However, what we have seen is that there is an overall focus of the kind of the National Recovery Plan and other financial instruments on financing one or few large-scale renewable energy projects. For example, the project for the installation of 1.7 gigawatts in new renewable energy power plants in combination of storage technologies is unnecessarily large spending that could contribute to wasteful consumption and wasteful concentration in one specific technology that is currently very expensive. The National Recovery Plan should actually harness a variety of different technologies so that we have a diversified mix of renewable energy plants. One of such technology is offshore wind, which has huge potential in Bulgaria. CSD estimated it earlier this year at 150 gigawatts in the Bulgarian offshore territory. Actually, Bulgaria is the only littoral country, so a country with access to a sea, that does not have any offshore wind energy framework. In addition, the accommodation of large share of variable renewable energy plants requires a modern, flexible, and resilient power system. This means closer integration with the European energy market, but also the introduction of new technologies such as smart grids that can allow for decentralization of supply and would actually help balance the system better in the future. This would boost security of supply and efficiency of allocation of power generation. Not to forget that supply means also better management of demand. Reducing the energy intensity of Bulgaria's economy is critical to reach carbon neutrality. It is also a key policy for improving energy security, as lower energy consumption means fewer energy imports, fewer fossil fuel energy imports, more importantly, and less power system volatility, especially in peak demand periods. Reducing energy demand requires energy efficiency measures and incentives for change in consumption patterns and business processes. Despite the large-scale energy efficiency programs for residential and public buildings in the proposed EU and national funding instruments, these efforts need to be streamlined to achieve a meaningful reduction of energy consumption. There needs to be a considerable increase in the rate of renovation, which is currently 0.9% of all buildings per year, to around 3.3 to 4% over the next decade. Also, the depth of energy renovation policy needs to be improved. This means not focusing on wall insulations only, but also a whole transition to a near zero energy buildings, where renewable energy, heating and power production are well integrated in the whole system of the building's consumption patterns. Last but not least, and Ruslan mentioned that in the beginning, let's put the energy poor Bulgarian consumer first. Just paralleling Mr. Trump's saying. Bulgaria should clearly link energy poverty with its energy security strategy. And this should be done via targeted measures that would empower consumers to become an integral part of the energy system, so that they become prosumers. Let's not forget that Bulgaria, and we have analyzed that before, has a potential of 5 gigawatts of decentralized PV, rooftop PV systems, most of them concentrated in one region of Bulgaria. This potential is not harnessed, is not unlocked yet. So just a brief picture of how we see the decarbonization of Bulgaria developing based on the current energy and climate security policy framework. Well, very slow. As you can see on this graph, which focuses on the fossil fuel mix by 2050, currently coal phase out is going to be delayed at least until 2035. And this is not sustainable at the back of the current fossil fuel prices, especially the prices of ETS quotas, basically making the economics of coal-fired power plants and gas-fired power plants unsustainable. As you can see, a little blue mountain here at the bottom, this is natural gas production of electricity until 2030. There will be a little bit of increase of natural gas power production, but because of the structure of the Bulgarian power system, even with 1 gigawatts of new gas-fired power capacity, it's unlikely that natural gas would be a major source of electricity generation in the future, because with the current hydropower capacity and because of our economic needs, these gas-fired power plants will probably be loaded at a very low level, 10–20% of its capacity. So that's another argument why it's a wasteful investment to build a new large-scale gas-fired power plant. Another argument against such gas investment is our natural gas security risk position. As you can see from this comparative graph, Bulgaria still scores as the most vulnerable country to natural gas supply disruptions in Europe. And with the increase of natural gas consumption based on this new gas-fired power plant, we expect this index to worsen and Bulgaria to become even more dependent on Russia. Actually, we estimate our dependence on Russia to increase by 1/3 if we build a new gas-fired power plant. Again, focusing on the power mix, the fossil fuel-based power plants could be much more efficiently replaced not by gas, but by renewables, as I mentioned. According to a modeling assessment that we have done on the NECP, the National Energy and Climate Plan, and the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the biggest increase in renewables will come from the integration of PV and, more importantly, onshore wind in the system. However, this leaves enormous potential for cutting-edge technologies, as I mentioned, such as offshore wind, geothermal, and hydrogen. These are untapped still. In addition, a more efficient use of hydropower, which is now used only at 1/3 of its capacity, will reduce the need for the construction of large-scale storage technologies. One important implication from the large uptake of renewables, and this is very critical, is that the use of nuclear power plant Kozloduy declines after 2040, as during most parts of the year renewables guarantee the power supply, making the maintenance of a large-scale baseload capacity at 100% unnecessary. And this is a good segue to my final slide, which are basically some key takeaways. And one of the key takeaways here is that we need to shelf the Belene nuclear power plant project until at least 2040, when the model that I just showed you showed that nuclear energy might be actually needed. Before 2040, we don't need a new large-scale baseload capacity according to the modeling. As I mentioned, we need to clearly define fossil fuel reliance, especially on Russia, as a primary long-term energy security risk, and switch funding to locally based, decentralized, citizen-led projects, not large-scale projects that actually could foster further state capture risks and feed oligarchic networks in the country. Finally, there is a need to clearly link energy and climate security policy with alleviating energy poverty, and this should be a broader development strategy, because everyone always says that it's not energy poverty, but it's general poverty. But general poverty can be actually cured with increasing the potential for households to become energy activists, energy citizens that actually benefit, financially profit from being part of the energy system. So it's a citizen-led energy system that we need, not an oligarchic-led one. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Martin, for these very clear policy messages, which provide a good basis for today for the discussion, for the two panel discussions. And in particularly, I would like to highlight your last point of the need for decentralization in countries like Bulgaria of the energy supply, as citizens so far have been excluded from the energy transition process, and they're the ones who mostly, especially the vulnerable ones and the energy poor, will bear the consequences of the energy crisis. So we need to make them also active participants on a European energy market. This will be also one of the topics that I will further delve in. But right now, we will basically switch to France, to Paris. We have our next speaker with us today, Marc-Antoine Mazega. Do we have already online? Our next speaker, Marc-Antoine Mazega, he's director of the Center for Energy and Climate at the French Institute for International Affairs, for International Relations, who is also advising the French government on international affairs and also energy issues. Do we have with us Mr. Marc-Antoine Mazega? Online? Hello. Yeah. Okay. Maybe there are some technical issues. Maybe in order not to disrupt the discussion, we'll turn to one of our speakers who is live here today. So Mr. Philip Kupfer, who is a commercial counselor at the Austrian Embassy in Sofia. Mr. Kupfer, when it comes to climate policies, okay, so it's already Mr. Mazega is here. Do you hear us?
Hello.
Hello. Yes, we hear you now.
Perfect.
Hello,
good morning.
Marc-Antoine. Good morning.
Shall I speak?
Yes, Mr. Mazega. Could you reflect on some of the what do you expect to be the key energy security and climate challenges within the next 5 years, and could you highlight some of the priorities of the upcoming French presidency, in particular when it comes on energy and climate issues? Currently, the EU has to implement the Fit for 55 package. It needs to provide a response to the energy crisis. So which legislative acts are expected to be brought, in particularly on the agenda of the French presidency? Thank you very much.
Okay, with pleasure. Let me perhaps start by thanking you all for this great opportunity and very timely conversation. Indeed, we are now in the midst of one of the worst energy and industrial and supply chain and, of course, sanitary crisis that we've ever faced. So this is quite a very difficult moment, and this is the time when we all need to accelerate on the energy transition. So it's a very challenging environment, of course. It's a major Green Deal crisis, but it comes with many opportunities, and the Fit for 55 package has been presented by the European Commission. It is the most comprehensive and advanced decarbonization package in the world. It will put the Europeans as the climate front runners, and not only in terms of ambition, but in terms of realization. So I think this is a historical moment. And of course, that should not come at the cost of our industries, our jobs, our cohesion, our unity, and our leadership. And so we have to manage this carefully. And actually, let me perhaps in a couple of points concur with the views that I already heard, and give you some French and perspectives also on the EU presidency. Of course, during the presidency, we'll try to move on some of the dossiers related to the Fit for 55 package, notably in the fields of energy efficiency and renewables, maybe the carbon border adjustment mechanism. But the point is, this is a longer process that will also involve the next presidencies. And in any case, the Fit for 55 package will not be all solved and finalized during the French presidency. But nonetheless, we have interesting developments in France, because as you heard, President Macron has now reiterated our strong belief and building into the future of nuclear for the decarbonization, in combination with energy efficiency and the large-scale deployment of renewables. And I think that can be a very interesting lesson for Bulgaria, because in fact, Bulgaria and France share one thing in common, which is that Bulgaria has no offshore wind, but a huge potential. And actually, so do we in France. We are very late in offshore wind, but we now intend to dramatically catch up. There is no alternative. We will build new nuclear power plants, but nonetheless, the share of nuclear will decrease pretty dramatically in our electricity mix. And so we have now to, in order to reduce the speed of the decrease, we have to build more nuclear, but also we have to ramp up very, very big time the offshore wind, the solar, and also the onshore. And I think the time is right for that. Offshore wind technologies are ready for massive deployment. That is a huge opportunity for Bulgaria. I think you will pay, same for us, probably 2 to 3 times less than our German or Danish or British colleagues when they developed their first huge installations 10 or 15 years ago. So that is a good news. The other good news is that it comes with industrial jobs, provided that you get the right scale, that you have a one-stop shop to really accelerate the procedures, that there is no corruption and whatsoever problems on the road, and that there is a strong political willingness to really accelerate there. And I think that is one great opportunity. The second one that I see is still decentralized solar. Obviously, there's a lot of room for that in Bulgaria as well, combined possibly here and there with batteries placed on the grids. But I would also not neglect, and which is very important, and I think the French are pretty good in that, it is basically demand-side response mechanism, especially to face peak time. So basically to have a number of interruptible consumers so that you basically decrease your peak generation needs. And I think the more you deploy renewables, the better this is. On the field of nuclear, I really much appreciate the view from our German colleagues, and I'm half German. Indeed, renewables can do a lot, but in a country like Bulgaria, which doesn't have the financial resources that Germany has, or Switzerland or Austria, obviously you also need to have nuclear in mind. You have some capabilities. I wouldn't bet anymore on the large reactors. I would prepare for the small ones when they are ready by 2030, 2035, and to also envisage to have a couple of them lined up in Bulgaria. That could work well. And last but not least, energy efficiency, and energy efficiency. You cannot repeat it more, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement here in Bulgaria as well, and reap the benefits from the new EU policies that will come. There will be a lot of money for the modernization of industries, a lot of money also for social redistribution, the social fund that is a new instrument that is proposed by the EU Commission should also help opportunities. And I cannot but agree that of course, this will be costly. Of course, there will be impacts on consumers. But if there is the right redistribution strategy in place, if there's a huge political consensus, and if there is clear, visible benefits to the population in terms of improved air quality, in terms of improved well-being, jobs, I think this is a win-win. And so I cannot but concur with many of the conclusions presented in the paper by CSD. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Many thanks, Marc-Antoine. So now we're moving to the next speaker. During the first presentation, one of the policy messages that Mr. Vladimirov outlined was coal phase out by 2030. And in Germany, the new coalition has already decided that there will be a coal phase out by 2030, how this will impact also the neighboring countries and the remaining coal producers. With this, I would like to introduce our next speakers, who is Christian Redl, and he's a senior energy and climate expert from the Energy Cooperation team at Agora Energiewende. Agora Energiewende is one of the also leading European policy think tanks, who is also providing policy advice to the German government and also the German parliament. So do we have currently Christian on board, Mr. Redl?
Hello, Radostina. Good morning, colleagues.
Okay, great, you're here. Many thanks for joining us here today, Christian. So could you tell us a bit more about this new coalition agreement in Germany, and what do you think would be the implications for other countries? And in particular, wouldn't a coal phase out of Germany by 2030 isolate the remaining EU coal-producing countries like Bulgaria, Czech Republic, and Poland? As already we're expecting that by 2030 coal will decrease by 83% in electricity production. And the other three countries, they're already making commitments for declining it, but by 43% already by 2030.
Many thanks, Radostina. Once again, good morning, or almost good afternoon, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, and congratulations to CSD and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for hosting this, I think, also very timely event. Very interesting input so far, so I look forward to the discussion. Now, Radostina, coming back to your question, indeed, I think the recent new coalition agreement of the three parties in Germany, the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberal Democrats, I think that can bring quite some fresh drive and momentum to the European Union energy policy discussions, to achieving the Green Deal, to achieving the 2030 emission reduction target. And indeed, I would say that the accelerated coal phase out, so so far Germany planned to phase out hard coal and lignite in the power system by 2038. Now, in the new government wants to move this forward to 2030. I think that's one of the main pillars, actually, because indeed, for meeting the 2030 EU target of minus 55%, actually, the coal phase out in the power system throughout Europe by 2030 is actually a requirement to meet these targets. So the power sector in the new coalition treaty continues to play, I should say, a central role. I mentioned the coal phase out. That is actually to be supported by a floor price, a national floor price for the EU ETS amounting to 60 euros per ton CO2. So this will even safeguard, let's say, the discouraging economics of coal generation, which we already see because of recent ETS price increases. It's also, I think, important to note that the coal phase out indeed is not compensated by gas generation, but by increasing the share of renewables in the electricity system. So the new renewables target will be 80% of renewables generation by 2030 already. Coming back to the security of supply discussion, it's quite likely that also some new investments in new gas power plants will be needed. But this is really for safeguarding security of supply and not for increasing the generation. So already by 2030, also the gas-fired generation will need to be reduced. That's, I think, very similar to the situation in Bulgaria and the figure we have seen by Martin. Also, the coalition treaty foresees that any new gas-fired power plants, it needs to be built such that it's ready for being converted to the use of hydrogen, because after the coal phase out comes the gas phase out, so we cannot rely on natural gas much longer than 2040. For the building sector, there is an indirect ban of new oil and gas heating systems foreseen in the coalition treaty, as the majority of new houses needs to be heated by renewables. This includes also heat pumps and decarbonized district heating. For the transport sector, there is a boost to electric mobility. So there's a new target that 15 million fully electric cars should be on the roads in Germany by 2030. And for the industry sector, I think the decarbonization policies foreseen in the coalition treaty, they are not only for the purpose of decarbonizing, but really to modernize the German industry to make it fit for the new, let's say, race to green products, green steel. We see it, many countries announcing projects. It's really about creating the lead markets of new green products also for heavy industry. And this is to be supported by innovative financial instruments, so-called carbon contracts for differences, but also quotas and public procurement. Now, these were, I think, the main elements of the new coalition treaty for the three main sectors, or four main sectors. What are the lessons now? Radostina, you mentioned, I should maybe also try to highlight some general principles or mechanisms of this energy policy that also links, let's say, Martin also mentioned this trilemma in energy policy making: economic competitiveness, environmental friendliness, and security of supply. And I think there are, let's say, content-wise, three main pillars of such a strategy, I would see. First of all, yes, the coal exit is an important one. And indeed, I agree, it's an important signal for the remaining 5 countries in Europe that are not yet planning for a 2030 coal phase-out. So next to Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, and Slovenia. It also clearly showcases that natural gas has a limited role to play. It's not a bridging technology. The EU market for natural gas is actually a shrinking market. So already by 2030, it will be some 30% smaller. And by 2050, there will be hardly any natural gas being used in the EU's energy system. Why is that? It's not climate neutral, of course. There will always be methane leakage issues for carbon capture. That's expensive. Also there, we cannot capture everything and store everything. That also means that natural gas, through the conversion to blue hydrogen, will have a very limited role to play. So that's also, I think, clear in the new German coalition agreement. There's a clear preference for renewable electricity-based green hydrogen. This altogether means that it's and I think that's also very nicely reflected in your new policy brief that Martin presented. It's the combination of electrification of end-use sectors through renewables, electricity, then the decarbonization happens, and energy efficiency. Again, as Marc John said, energy efficiency. These two pillars are the most effective options for reaching net zero. I'm a bit less optimistic on new nuclear. I have to say, in my view, new nuclear is expensive. It takes long to build. So for meeting 2030 target, it will not help at all. Also, small modular reactors, they are, I think, quite hyped at the moment, but they're actually not new. It's been discussed for ages already. Well, when you compare the progress with, let's say, PV, wind, be it onshore, offshore, I think there's a strong case for renewables, and indeed we need the strong renewables deployment. And then maybe my last remark.
Maybe your concluding remarks, yes.
Yes, of course. My concluding remark is we need this policy mix to enable all of this. We need carbon pricing flanked by policies to shield low-income households with financial compensation mechanisms. We need energy efficiency policies. We need standards for our building sectors, for our transport sectors, and of course, renewable deployment policies. And this all needs to be embedded in integrated long-term energy planning processes, which link power systems, heat systems, and the gas system. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Christian, for this comprehensive overview and also your reflections. So before we proceed to the next speaker, I would like to ask the ones that joined online could ask their questions in the chat, that we can later filter them and also come back to them. And also regarding the policy brief, my colleagues also inserted, you can find it on our website, and already my colleagues inserted the link to our policy brief also in the chat. And the ones that are here, it's already at the reception. So we continue now with the next speaker, who is sitting next to me here live, Mr. Philip Kupfer, who is a commercial counselor at the Austrian Embassy in Sofia. When it comes to climate ambition, Austria is one of the pioneers, that it already adopted a climate neutrality target for 2040, which is 10 years earlier than the European target for 2050. And it's also, Austria is a good example also for leveraging private and public finance in sustainable investment. So, Mr. Kupfer, could you mention in your presentation maybe what is the success formula for reaching this ambitious target by 2040, and if you could identify some best practices from Austria that maybe could be applied here in Bulgaria or in Southeast Europe?
Dear Excellencies, the organizers of the CSD, congratulations for this very interesting conference. Dear audience, online and here, I would like to start with the status quo. We found ourselves in challenging times for the population and for the economy, and especially for the producing sector, of course also here in Bulgaria. Costs of energy on the markets are constantly piercing the threshold of 500 Bulgarian level per megawatt, something like approximately 250 euro and above. And inflation rates in November, also due to the energy prices, were reaching all-time highs since the beginning of the new millennium. Yesterday, I just heard in the news in Germany, it reached 5.2%, and in Austria, only 4.3%. However, these developments are not necessarily helpful to the recovering economies. The entire economy is seriously affected by the substantial rises in energy prices, and I'm sure that you have already heard that large companies also in Bulgaria had to even cease their production activities for at least some time. But what is the solution, and how can the economy participate? And of course, there is not one answer, a so-called silver bullet.
You can change your slides.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. There is no such a silver bullet, and if I knew it, I would be honored if you could vouch for me in front of the Nobel Prize Committee. But however, I'd cautiously try an eclectic approach. Climate protection and energy security through enduring transformation and diversification, ongoing green investments and expansion of renewables that may lead on the long run to enhanced energy independence endorsed by international alliances and cooperation. Europe remains a pioneer, and the important thing now is to build international alliances for concrete minimum standards in climate protection. And at COP26, further steps were taken towards achieving the Paris Climate Agreement, And as Europe, we can be satisfied that other important economic areas have also made significant concession in the direction of climate protection and creating a globalized level playing field. But Europe must focus on innovation and show that climate protection and growth are compatible. Only if we succeed in building a prosperous, ecologically sustainable economic and energy system, other countries in the world will follow. Climate protection and economic growth must go hand in hand. And I would like to emphasize the economy and the vast majority of the companies are enablers of transformation, and the economy is part of the solution. Europe has led the way with its Fit for 55 package, which is meant to incentivize climate-friendly innovations and investments, and elements that Europe should also take into consideration. To achieve the transformation, concrete measures, incentives, and a globally coordinated strategy for CO2 reduction are needed, not unilateral decisions. The planned reform of the EU emissions trading system must not lead to a decline in the competitiveness of European industry. Decarbonization can only succeed if companies are not forced out of the market by unequal international competition. And the focus must be on reducing, of course, greenhouse gases, while at the same time ensuring the secure supply and competitiveness of energy. So we urge the transformation is conducted rapidly. And for Austria, and that's maybe also relevant for other member countries, my organization has identified 4 important framework conditions for swift investments in climate protection and in the long run that may also lead to enhanced energy independence. New innovative financing models. One of the biggest challenges is not just the capital costs of investments, but the operating costs of climate-friendly technologies. Therefore, we need new and innovative financing models to make these usage costs competitive, such as, for example, its transformation funds for the economy. Better access to climate-neutral energies. At the same time, access to climate-neutral energies must be rapidly expanded, for which the implementation of local laws must gain speed. For instance, a hydrogen and CO2 recycling strategy must be created, and the potential of green or biogas must be exploited. An infrastructure offensive. After all, the expansion of renewable electricity production capacities also requires that the rest of the infrastructure, such as storage facilities, smart grids, transmission lines, grows along with it. However, approval procedures can be a bottleneck for its infrastructure expansions. And last but not least, strengthening the competitiveness. An important prerequisite for counteracting climate change is global approaches, level playing fields that also strengthen competitiveness. And as our moderator already said, Austria is proud to be some kind of a role model. Renewable energies are of major importance in Austria in all different sectors, such as wind, hydropower, biomass, and PV. And I will just point out 2 technologies. A very important technology in Austria is especially hydroelectric power. At present, we have more than 700 run-of-river power plants and some of 3,000 small-scale hydropower stations, which generate approximately 60% of Austria's electricity needs. So Austria is #1 in Europe when it comes to utilizing hydropower, and we are proud that turbines and generators made in Austria set regularly new worldwide standards, and we are also proud to be home to one of the world's largest providers in hydropower generation. Wind energy, which is also maybe interesting to Bulgaria. A total of over 1,300 wind power plants in Austria produce a total output of over 3,000 megawatts. And they produce energy for over 2 million households. With this wind power production, 3 million tons of CO2 can be avoided annually. A single one of these modern 3 megawatt wind power plants saves as much CO2 annually 2,000 cars emit in total. And something that we have already heard during different presentations. Of course, nuclear energy, which is something that you might have missed, or I'm sure you know, Austria does not produce any nuclear power, and this is a decision that was taken politically decades ago. So why is Austria so good at renewables? First of all, the political determination, and of course also the geographical position. As you see on the picture, we have a lot of rivers, a lot of lakes. We have effective laws with incentives for renewables and investment, and of course, a very high ratio of R&D. In an EU comparison, if you compare all the EU member states, Austria ranks first in the share of renewable energies. But why is this so? There are different reasons. To name but a few, a part that we also have, as I already mentioned, that we have among our companies also world leaders and hidden champions. We have a very high ratio of research and development. It totals in Austria, it is approximately 3.2% of the GDP, which is approximately 12.5 billion euro. And this clearly shows the high effectiveness and return on investments also in the field of energy efficiency. And out of those 12.5 billion euros, 6.3 billion, so that's over 50%, the biggest proportion of the research expenditures comes directly from the companies themselves. And one thing which is maybe also very relevant for Bulgaria, constant training of the employees is very important in the field of renewable energies. And we have a special feature in Austria, the so-called dual education system. So on the one side, you work in a company, and on the other side, at the same time, you attend a vocational school. And this system also guarantees that there will be also specialists in the future who are able to combine theory and practice. And by finishing, I would like to try to dare an outlook. In the energy industry, there is a trend towards big data, smart meters, smart grids, and virtual power plants. And smart grids, as Martin has already mentioned, is a topic which will gain even more importance in the years to come, taking into consideration the projected phasing out of the coal-produced energy. And it is, I must say, it is a topic which the economy, especially the Austrian economy here in Bulgaria, also would have loved to see more present in the Bulgarian recovery and resilience plan. And I must say the economy and the vast majority of the companies want to make an active contribution to achieving the climate goals, and the companies take their responsibility towards the environment and the energy autonomy seriously. And it must be, and it is, a top priority of the political institutions all over Europe to create an environment where the economy can seize this responsibility, and as a means to support this endeavor serves the recovery and resilience plans of the different countries. Austria and many other countries have already started in the operative phase, which is a thing that the economy would also wish for Bulgaria very soon. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Mr. Kupfer, for highlighting some of the key also energy trends in Austria and also the key pillars of the energy transformation there. Since time is now advancing, we'll move to the next session, and I will switch to Bulgarian, as it will be more the political debate.
During the second panel, which is the perspectives for green reconstruction in Bulgaria, we have the pleasure of hosting experts from our political parties. Some of them are members of the working group of the energy regulator. The negotiations for a new government are going on, and there is a major question for all of you, and then we'll have other questions. Which is the most effective way to low-carbon transformation of the Bulgarian energy and economy? Because for the last couple of years, everything concerning climate legislation is lagging behind. We were one of the last, to prepare a reconstruction plan. We are lagging behind in adopting the directives for the internal energy market and reliable renewable energy sources. Projects are not ready. The long-term strategy for decarbonization, which should have been ready. But if we have a government in December to work on the deadline of 2050, probably we'll be able to catch the last train for energy reconstruction. We invited Arsen Vasiliev, but unfortunately he wasn't able to come. So the next on the list is Mr. Martin Dimitrov, chairman of the 46th Parliament from the group of Democratic Bulgaria. He was part of an expert group from 2009 to 2013. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the CSD and Mr. Stefanov for the invitation. Mr. Torsten Geisler, thank you again from Konrad Adenauer. We need an expert debate. I listened to Martin Vladimirov. He gave a very good presentation. But let's start with something different. Since the summer, the prices of energy have gone up. Electricity, natural gas, and many people reacted emotionally, and they started building nuclear power stations very quickly. Well, there is no need for panic because we lack important information. First of all, we don't know whether this is a stable trend. I mean, prices of energy going up in Europe and Bulgaria. Maybe prices will go down in the autumn. So we shouldn't hurry long-term investment decisions. We can't rely on data from the last 5 or 6 months to prepare our long-term strategy. So our working group asked the question for new nuclear projects, and I said, let's analyze first. Let's see the facts. And only then we can start discussing and making decisions. So we should remember that we don't know. No one knows. Looking at futures, prices of futures, energy, natural gas, they might go down during the spring, during the next autumn. So it's early to paint a long-term picture. Well, we won't have the previous prices if we follow the history in such crises. But next, we don't have an energy strategy, and that was on purpose, because certain expensive projects to come and go. So if we want to stabilize our energy sector, if we want green recovery, we must have a comprehensive strategy. There are other factors negatively impacting Bulgarian energy, corruption especially. Many people say that we don't have corruption. The problems are because of the European Green Deal, but it's corruption which is to blame, not the Green Deal. And the same people who say that, I wanted an audit of the overall Bulgarian energy sector so that we see what problems we have and so that we see what to do next. We can't say that problems are somewhere else. I can give you an example. Bulgaria gave up $1 billion of compensation for the previous gas contracts, and we don't know what to do with that, and it's a big amount of money. Talking about green recovery, there is another important issue. In 2022, we will have to sign a new contract with Russia for natural gas supply, and I can't see a debate going on in Bulgaria, and we must have one. Decentralization is good, liberalization is good, green recovery is good, but if we have a new long-term contract, and if it's like the previous contract, what will happen? Our next contract with natural gas supply should be shorter, more flexible, without clauses like take or pay, so that the decentralization and liberalization do happen, and so that Bulgaria can really diversify the supplies, so that we can buy what is the best choice. We will have to decide this. I hope the new government will be responsible. I hope we will have a public debate on the consequences. Next. A couple of days ago, our MEP Traikov called us, and they said the European Parliament is discussing Fit for 55. The debate is going on, but Bulgaria doesn't have a position. So I asked him, okay, why don't you look for allies so that you formulate a common stand? Because that's the way the European Parliament works. You can't change anything by yourself, but if you find allies, you can change everything. Okay, how do I do this without having a Bulgarian position? So this has to change. If you have a key issue, we have to have a national standpoint. We shouldn't wait for the EU to tell us what our interest is. We should define our interests and our standpoint. Many people spoke about energy efficiency. Okay, we've got a good potential here because production, transportation, distribution, end consumer, businesses, if we go up in terms of diversification, this will affect positively energy prices, energy consumption. It has benefits, but we have to improve the way we apply energy efficiency in Bulgaria. Another important issue, energy poverty. We have to define it strictly so that we take measures to combat it, because if we are to have a green recovery, people should support it. If ordinary people think that green recovery is higher energy prices, and many of them think exactly that, although they shouldn't, our goal is to change their perception. The guests who spoke, they had very good presentations. They mentioned energy supporting economic growth and not vice versa. So if people are to support green recovery and green transition, the energy poor have to have protection mechanisms, and they should be working properly so that we get public support. The so-called smart networks, many presentations mentioned them. Okay, they are important, they should happen. And I believe in Bulgaria there is opposition to this, because this will lead to better management of the energy system, and there are people who don't want that to happen. Oh, they say, it's very expensive, we needn't even talk about that. Of course we should talk about that. Your final words, Mr. Dimitrov? So, as a conclusion, green transition is possible, it has to be smart, and it should boost the economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dimitrov. I would like to invite Mr. Dilian Dobrev former Minister of Economy and Energy, 2012-13, and Chairman of Energy and Climate in the Legislature Parliamentary Committee 2014-2017. And I would like to ask the next panelists to make their presentation within 5 minutes in order to give the opportunity for questions and answers. Mr. Dobrev, what are the 3 priorities that have to be the backbone of our policy in the next 5 years, and will Bulgaria catch up with the delay? I'm not sure. I'm going to be extremely brief to leave some time for my colleagues. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you for presenting the report. I hope that this report is reflected in the program of the new majority in Parliament, because everything that should happen in energy is part of your report. And if we achieve the goals that you set there, we will be very successful. I think we need to have 2 things in place. First, amendment of legislation. We are late, you said too. We are late because in the last 12 months we had 3 legislators, 3 parliaments working 8 weeks each, and this created political instability. And we delayed our action compared to other countries, compared to Romania. For example, Romania is much more advanced than Bulgaria in terms of energy legislation. We don't have a law on offshore wind power. Even if you want to invest in Bulgaria in the offshore power stations, there is no legal grounds for them to invest in this. This has to be adopted as quickly as possible. Another legislative amendments should be in the line is the investment in renewables, something which I very much like and I would like to support with my colleagues here, is the approach of Romania. For example, they abolished the request to change the purpose of the land very quickly. Agricultural land can be converted into a plot for wind energy plant. Changing the statute of land requires more money, as it is now. If we abolish this, we will encourage more wind energy to be invested in and diversify our energy mix. The third one that needs changing is to update the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. This version, you said, is not as bad as the previous one. In my opinion, it is very bad. It says we need a new gas power plant. We don't need that. We don't need large scale and storage facilities. Gas power plant and storage facilities, this is nuisance. We have to invest in a smart grid. We need to increase the transition capacity, the transport capacity, and we need to have a smart grid and use this money. We can use this money for pilot projects. There is a potential in Bulgaria in renewables, and it is not so dreadful. And last but not least, you mentioned in the report, this is the first time I see that, something very important about the energy system in Bulgaria. We have to invest in the so-called retrofit of the water power plants of NEC. Improve the efficiency. Potentially, we have 15%. With very little investment, we can improve the installed capacity of Bulgaria with 500 megawatts, which is great efficiency, and the next parliament and the next government should act swiftly. And although we are going to be in opposition, we are going to support them in this direction. Thank you, Mr. Dobrev. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Trajkov, who is now a local mayor of one of the regions in Sofia, but he's also has been Minister of Energy from 2009 till 2012. How can we unlock investment in innovative technologies like offshore energy? You are representative of the local authority. How? Well, you're closest to the citizens. How can we incentivize people to invest in energy efficiency and become producers? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this extremely interesting and timely conference. I was tempted to imagine that I am responsible for a region that is coastal region. No chance. I am in Sofia. Anyway, it is good to invest in technology. Smart technologies are developing quicker than the traditional ones. Bulgaria is late in making decisions regarding the new technologies. And when I say Bulgaria, I mean the government, the state, because private initiative is trying to exhaust all the existing possibilities. There are Bulgarian engineering companies everywhere. They have projects everywhere in the world regarding renewable sources. And number three, people of Bulgaria, the public in Bulgaria, is unaware of both facts. And no focused effort is made to educate people that they can benefit from this transition. I pass daily by a bicycle repair shop, and I ask him, "How are you doing?" "Badly." I said, "Why?" "Because of the Green Deal," he tells me. I didn't have time to ask him to explain why is the Green Deal bad for bicycles. But it shows the level of awareness of people. Each TV debate or each piece of news regarding electricity prices is a report against the Green Deal. And this is a fact. And we have to introduce logic and expertise into the debate in order to explain to people that this is not the case. The truth being that in order to do that, let me reiterate again, just one sentence, allow me. It is of utmost importance for Bulgaria to get ready for Fit for 55. The local authorities, the municipalities, have to have a very serious input in the efforts, because for part of the pieces of the puzzles, we're talking buildings, we're talking transport means, and they are in the realm of responsibility of municipalities and the local authorities. And the capacity, expert capacity locally regarding energy efficiency and renewable energy, new energy. When you talk to the local experts, they think, oh, okay, we insulate the walls of the buildings. But the local authorities also have to be trained in thinking differently. Thank you. I thank you very much. And the last panelist, Dr. Ivan Ivanov, who is the chairman of the Energy and Water Regulatory Commission. Energy poverty was mentioned, and people who are excluded from the process of the energy, the so-called energy poor people or low-income households. And the European Directive for Renewable Energy is pending transposition in Bulgaria. And there is also a European framework for pro-consumer-oriented policy and energy communities. Energy community is a new term with the intent to make the citizens proactive parts of the decarbonization process. The transposition of the directive is delayed in Bulgaria, and maybe the energy communities that are good for overcoming the gap between the energy poor and the others. It is important to have them, and they're delayed. How are they going to be called? The so-called prosumers, producers and consumers. And what is going to be the regulatory framework to regulate that?
Thank you. Before I answer your questions, I'd like to comment on what my colleagues asked. The three most important things that must happen for the next 10 years. Everybody has a different opinion, but what is an absolute must is for Bulgaria to have an energy strategy adopted at the necessary legal level. The Council of Ministers should propose it, and the Parliament should discuss and adopt it. And in that energy strategy, you should put in, first of all the measures leading to fast-tracking the development of renewable energy sources production, decentralization of the energy system, setting up energy communities in the big towns, because that's where it can be done easily. You know, there are housing complexes there, lots of buildings. So that's where we should focus with the new requirements for smart grids, impacting positively to optimize energy consumption. Smart metering, which will allow managing the energy consumption in the respective building. This is the most important part of an energy strategy. And we don't have a strategy. Our strategy ended in 2020. 27% of the consumption should come from renewable sources. This is a requirement. And for electricity, 30%. So we have a long way to go to achieve those. The second important topic in the energy strategy, and everybody who must do it actually run away. That's the future of the coal-powered energy plants in Bulgaria. Brussels set 2038, 2040 as an end date without analyzing it, without thinking how we will transform our economy, how to find alternative jobs for those people. Otherwise, employment will be lost. Now, this hasn't been done so far because no one is brave enough. I hope that the future government will do what must be done in compliance with EU directives, because in 2025 all state support for coal-powered power plants will end. Now, right now, the price of 1 ton carbon emissions on the EU platform, 74 euro and 80 euro cents for a ton of emissions. Let's think about our power plants. How much will it cost to put into price of electricity that emissions? So multiply for 1.35 because lignite coals 196 leva. That's 200 leva for 1 megawatt per hour electricity. Only for emissions, if those power plants go on. This is absurd. We have to devise measures, timelines, and then the third issue, the future of nuclear power plants. Everybody believes Bulgaria should have some nuclear energy, but this should be only on the basis of substitution power. Meaning, for the past 10 years, we have prolonged the functioning of the old reactors. We should be planning new reactors if we need energy. We are even exporting 1,000, 2,000 megawatt of energy, which means that Bulgaria right now meets its needs. We even export electricity. Those are the three things that the new government should address with consensus in our parliament, because only then we will stop with populist measures, avoiding the real issues. Otherwise, I applaud the report, but the report should find its spot in discussions leading to a new energy strategy. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ivanov. Since we started late and we should be wrapping up, I'm sure we've got interesting questions in the chat, but we've answered those. Now, have you any urgent questions? Because if not, let's continue our discussions informally during the cocktail party after the event. There is one question. Can you introduce yourself and tell me, Nicola Gantov, chairperson of the Association for Production Storage of Electric Energy. A short question to the members of parliament, because they talk about new nuclear projects, and now we hear that Mr. Ivanov mentioned them. Do you think it's possible to have a new project for nuclear power without any state guarantee, public resources invested in one or several decentralized projects? Or you think those funds should go to other spheres like healthcare, digital infrastructure, education? Thank you. Any other urgent questions? No? So who wants to answer? Yes, Mr. Dobrev. There is a decision of the parliament, and I'm one of those who decided it. If a new nuclear power plant should be built, the parliament says that no state money should go into it. I don't think this can happen. And I think that the working groups of the coalition for a new power plant, this is a waste of time. We should be focusing on other important issues. Thank you. Mr. Ivanov? What Mr. Dobrev said is true. And by the way, all future investors always ask about guarantees, state guarantees, when it comes to nuclear power plants. The Parliament says it clearly and categorically, and I don't think that this decision will be changed. But just to mention, today in Paris, you have the forum of the French-speaking regulators. And I've been following it. France, with the best developed nuclear energy sector in Europe and probably the world, has no plans to build new nuclear power plants. France is designing, and they will be starting building in Normandy, the offshore area of 2,000 megawatt wind power stations, 2 nuclear blocks with 1,000 megawatts. Other in Brittany, 100 megawatt. So offshore, renewable energy. France is aiming at renewable energy. If now 70% of the electricity comes from nuclear, only in 2030 they will slash 50% of those and substitute renewable energy sources for it. Thank you, Mr. Ivanov. Anyone else wanting to? Thank you. Your question is reasonable. Together with Mr. Traikov and other colleagues, we talked about it in the committee. And what we said to our colleagues who said, yes, we have to build a new power plant, we told them, let's analyze all the issues, because there are a lot of issues: prices, guarantees, timelines, necessity, funding. And we convinced them to start writing down projects in this direction, because if we don't have answers about, for instance, how many megawatts, what do we do? Of course, there will be a public debate. The CSD is going to play a very important role there. Let's have an analysis. Let's have a public debate. Let's see what happens. Thank you very much. I think that this ends the discussion for today. I'd like to thank our panelists with their very informative presentations and inputs. I'd like to thank the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for their partnership, and I'd like to thank everybody who joined us live or online. The CSD will continue on the 16th of December with another online event where we will speak about long-term scenarios for decarbonization, and you will be invited for that event too. With this, I'd like to invite you to our cocktail party. Thank you.